Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA grades against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game, both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise, you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan-voted, but ultimately, this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. In the 25th episode of the series, we take a look at 2 Hall of Fame power forwards who both won championships with the Boston Celtics in the 1960s. Tom Heinsohn was a lifelong Celtic who entered the league with Bill Russell, and although he only played 9 seasons, he went to a finals every single season of his career, and won all of them except for one, which is an amazing feat. Bailey Howell started his career with the Detroit Pistons, playing most of his prime there before joining the Celtics and winning 2 championships with them. So who had the greater career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, it's very close, as they both averaged similar career points per game, and both were leading scorers for their team in some capacity. Heinsohn averaged 18.6 points per game for his career, peaking at 22.1 points per game in 1962, and 19.8 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at a stellar 24.7 points per game in 1962. Most people don't realize that Heinsohn in the playoffs was asked to take a bigger offensive role, was actually the leading scorer for the Celtics in the finals from 1957 to 1961. Sam Jones didn't take over as the leading scorer until around 1962. Howell averaged a similar 18.7 points per game and peaked at 23.6 per game in 1961, and averaged 16.3 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 20.8 per game in 1965. Although Howell played a bigger offensive role with the Pistons, he didn't up his game in the playoffs like Heinsohn did, So you could say that while Howell was better in the regular season, Heinsohn was better in the playoffs, a theme which generally holds true throughout this video. So for this reason, this category will be a tie. In the rebounding category, both players were fairly confident rebounders. Although they were not Elgin Baylor, Bob Pettit, Dolph Schayes, Jerry Lucas, or Dave DeBusschere level, both could still rebound quite well. Heinsohn averaged 8.8 rebounds a game for his career, peaking at 10.6 a game in 1960, and 9.2 a game in the playoffs, peaking at 11.7 per game in 1957. Howell had the better regular season numbers, averaging 9.9 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at 14.4 rebounds per game in 1961, and 8.1 rebounds per game in the playoffs, also peaking at 11.7 per game in 1965. Both players were 6'7" and very tough rebounders down low, but this category would have to go to Howell for being a bit better consistently. Although it could be argued that Heinsohn could have averaged more rebounds per game if he wasn't playing with Bill Russell his whole career. In the passing category, it's more or less a wash, as both had the same assists per game for their careers. Both averaged 2 assists per game for their careers, but Howell peaked a bit higher at 2.9 assists per game in 1963 compared to Heinsohn's peak at 2.5 assists per game in 1959. Heinsohn averaged slightly higher in the playoffs at 2.1 assists per game, but Howell had the higher peak at 4.4 assists per game in 1961. So this is once again a tough category to call, as neither player was really asked to distribute or do the playmaking much, so this category will also be a tie. In the efficiency advanced metrics category, this will go to Howell, as he was the more efficient player by a significant margin. Heinsohn was a more old school player in the 1950s style and would chuck up quite a lot of shots, especially his signature running hook shot. I hope that some of them will go in. While Howell was a bit more careful in his shot selection and was a pretty good shooter for his time, so this category will have to go to Howell. In the defense category, it's hard to judge because all defensive wasn't an award until 1969, and also due to the lack of footage for both of these players, we only have defensive win shares to look at, which clearly favors Tom Heinsohn. Howell seems like an okay defender, but Heinsohn was one of the main defensive options for his team, so it was quite surprising that his defensive win shares dwarfed his offensive win shares and beats Howell by a decent margin here. Thus, this category will have to go to Tom Heinsohn. In the awards category, both were 6-time All-Stars and both won championships with the Boston Celtics. However, Howell was only a top 3 player on one of them, in 1968, whereas Heinsohn was a top 3 player on 5 of them, 1957, 1959, 1960, 1961, and 1963. Heinsohn's championship total dwarfs Howell's, and he was a top player for more of these teams. He also has more All-NBA selections, thus this category will have to go to Heinsohn. So when all the categories are summed up, Howell takes the rebounding and efficiency categories while Heinsohn takes the defense and awards category, with the rest being a tie. Since the overall score is tied, if asked to choose a winner, I would have to pick Heinsohn, since he also comes pretty close to Howell in the rebounding category, but Howell doesn't really come close to Heinsohn in awards or defense. Since both of these players played so long ago, many modern fans don't really know about them, and that's why I want to do a video more about old school players. Bailey Howell was a great rebounder and tough player who was one of the better shooters for his position in his era, maybe equal to Jerry Lucas in that aspect. While Tom Heinsohn was a key offensive and defensive player in the early Celtics dynasty, I don't think many fans realize he was the main offensive scorer in the early Celtics years, not Sam Jones or Bob Cousy, although overall Heinsohn tends to be ranked beneath Jones and Cousy. It also surprised me that he was quite a capable defender as well. Hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Thanks for watching, hope you guys learned something new, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.